Hi, this is Bryan Falk. Welcome to another edition of Building Talk. This week I have Nile Wilke with Beach Exteriors. Nile is an expert in asphalt shingle installations. Nile, thanks for joining us. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've always kind of been around the construction industry, so finally I decided to get into just one part of it, which would be roofing. So,
Great. How long have you been a roofer?
I used to be on a crew for quite a while, just throwing shingles and picking up and just doing some of the minimal stuff on that. But um, eventually I got into some subcontracting for project manager that worked for a big company, and then I became a project manager. Now I'm part owner.
Excellent, yeah. And I've known Nile for, about a year or so. He works out of the same coworker space as me. So we've talked roofs off and on for that time period. Can you tell me, I'm a architect that does mostly low slope roofs, not a whole lot of asphalt shingle roofs. So you can educate me a lot on this topic. What are the different types of asphalt roofs, and why would you choose one type over another?
Well, basically there's your 3 tab, which is a 20 or 25-year shingle. Then there's your architectural style, which is a 30-year, and then above that you have some impact resistant. You have your designer shingles and premium shingles. So basically it's the 3 tab, the 30-year, and then the 50-year impact resistant.
And when they put a 30-year or 50-year tag on that, that's not an actual warranty period, right? That's more of a expected. Why do they call it a 30-year or a 50-year?
Well, it's supposed to last approximately that long. Of course, it's always dependent on weather and conditions and climate and everything like that.
So what would you recommend to a typical homeowner, and why? Why would you recommend each product, and what applications are they best for?
Well, we never put on a 3 tab. That's something that a lot of companies will never put on anymore, just because they are not durable enough. They're harder to put on, and they just do not last long enough. And they have a lot of faults to them. So we put on a 30-year architectural shingle. It goes on a lot quicker. We even do it for the same price as the 3 tab, just because it costs more to buy, but we can put it on there quicker, which saves in build time. So that's normally what we put on.
And 3 tabs are the older styles shingle that you would typically see in older neighborhoods up until the last maybe 15 years or so, right? Where they don't have they have a flat appearance, correct?
They have a flat appearance.
Yeah, and so it's less asphalt within the actual shingle, or is
Yes,
that the main difference?
there's less layers. It's basically one layer, where your architectural is going to have 2, sometimes even 3 different layers in that one shingle, which really helps resist hail and wind.
Excellent. Is there installation differences between the different types of asphalt shingles?
Basically, they go on the same. Depending on the style of shingle, the thickness is different, and then there's different little parts of the shingle, like the nailing strip, that it makes a difference on the quality of the shingle. Just depends on how easy it is to install correctly, as far as the manufacturer's warranty.
Great. Is there each type, does it have a different layering system? For instance, what's the underlayment and the substrate? And talk about how each system differs, or if maybe it doesn't differ.
No, it's pretty much the same.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for now, the way that code is, and places that don't have code, for your manufacturer's warranty, you need to have a solid base to put it on. Which is, if you don't have a solid base, we're going to put OSB on, so that it has one solid. There's no gaps, because they used to do strip sheathing, or if you used to have shake shingles, there's not wood behind all of those shingles if you're going to put them on, after wood shake shingle. You cannot have any gaps or spaces, so it needs to be solid. And then after that, you have the felt, and then you have the shingle on top of that.
Great. You mentioned OSB as a substrate. Do you ever install plywood? And why would you install plywood versus OSB?
You can install plywood, it's just more expensive.
More expensive.
Um,
I heard that it delaminates and fails in a different way. Have you experienced that where the whole plywood sheet tends to fail, kind of like separating at one time versus OSB, which if there's an issue, it will fail and where that puncture occurs?
Yeah, it gets wet and deteriorates right where you have your leaking problem.
Yeah.
I have not experienced that much. I mean, we have a lot of experience in taking out the decking where it has been bad. Usually, even with OSB, it's when it gets wet, it's going to wick into the areas around it. So it's going to be bad for a couple feet in diameter. So
Excellent. Tell me a little bit about the amount of layers that are typically allowed in a roof before you would have to do a complete tear off.
well, we'll only do up to 2 layers, and I don't even like to do that because really what the insurance wants to see, and that's a lot of our work is insurance work. We do retail because that's we're trying to save people money because a roof is an expensive thing, and if insurance is not paying for it, it needs to get done. But typically it's insurance work, and they only want to see 1 layer because you start adding layers, and that starts adding problems. We'll do 2 layers, but we're a little reluctant to do it, and we won't put 3 layers just because we don't want our name to be associated with a bad roof. Or in the real estate world where they're selling houses, they may require you to redo the roof if there's 3 layers. And to put on 1 layer over top of another, if you don't know the age of that shingle that's the first layer, it could be deteriorating very rapidly, and it's going to get worse when you put the second layer on because of the heat buildup, and then also it could damage equipment as far as your nail gun. When you try to put a nail through a shingle and you hit the top of another nail, it can damage your nail gun.
Oh, that's interesting. Now tell me also, what percentage of roofs are typically done through the insurance company versus somebody that just decides they want to pay for a new roof out of pocket? Is it a very small amount of people that actually do that?
There's a very high amount of people, and that's what a lot of the roofing companies are looking for. They're waiting for a storm to come through.
High for insurance.
High for insurance.
So 9 out of 10 are insurance claims.
9 out of 10, 8 out of 10, somewhere
Yes.
in there.
Excellent. Tell me a little bit about typical cost per square foot for asphalt shingle roofing. Is there any rules of thumb on this?
Well, when you get into roofing, there's a lot of different aspects as far as layers and pitch and high cost as far as it being over 1 story tall. You get paid extra for all those things. But if it's a 1 story, just at a normal pitch, which is not low roofing, but it's not a really high pitch. It's hard to work on.
Like 4 to 12 or something like that.
Yeah. Typically, it's somewhere around $300 per square, which square is 100 square feet.
Yeah. And talk to me a little bit about the phrase square. We were talking earlier about this. I found this interesting. Where did that term come from?
I believe it's from the insurance, where they go up there and when they're testing a roof for hail damage, they're looking at a square. I mean, they actually draw a square on the roof that's 10 foot wide, like 10 foot across and 10 foot up, and they're marking the number of hits from hail that are inside of that square.
Hits from hail. Interesting. Now tell me a little bit about how hail damages asphalt shingles and the type of what we should be looking at to determine that there has been damage to an asphalt roof.
Well, it can be a little tricky if you've never been up there looking for it before. It's always hard when somebody's just learning the roofing industry. When hail falls, if it has any size to it, like a golf ball size, what it's going to do, it's going to bruise the shingle. And it's going to make a little bit of an indentation. It's going to start knocking off granules. Sometimes they can be hard to see, but what it does, the shingles have a fiberglass layer inside of there, and it's breaking that fiberglass layer, and it's knocking the granules off, so it's exposing the asphalt. And over time, after the hail hits, it's still functional most of the time, unless it's really, really big hail that's moving with a lot of velocity. If it's just a normal hail hit, your roof is still functional, it's still working, but after repeated exposure to the sun, without those granules being there, the asphalt is going to deteriorate. It's going to start cracking, and that's when it's going to start opening up over time to let the water get beneath that shingle and possibly into your house after that.
That's a great explanation. I never knew the details of that. Now, talk to me a little bit about how high winds can damage asphalt shingles and what we should be looking for there. It seems like maybe that's a little bit more apparent. You'll just see missing asphalt shingles. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's a lot. A lot has to do with the 3-tab shingles, because they just are not resistant to the high winds. And what happens is the tar line that helps hold down those shingles starts to deteriorate, and when the wind hits it, it's able to break that bond from one shingle to the next. Actually causes what we call a zipper effect, where it lifts one up, but then that shingle is attached to the next one, so it lifts the next one up. And when they're laid in a diagonal fashion, and it will rip all those shingles going all the way up the roof, rip them apart from the other shingle, and it leaves a effect that looks like a zipper. And one way that we combat against that is people will use a starter shingle at the bottom along the eaves, and that's the normal way to install that. But we take the starter shingle and we put them up the rake or up the gable. And what happens is that starter allows for a glue line to go vertical, and it adheres that shingle to the edge of the roof so that it fights against wind damage.
So at the damage typically occurs at the edge of the roof. Is that right? And that's why you're doing that?
It's very possible that it occurs at the edge of a roof. I mean, that's a normal spot for it, and that's when you start, when you have the zipper effect, the shingles don't always pull all the way up and off of the roof. They can, but they don't always, because it has that other shingles to rely upon to help hold them down. But if it's at the edge of the roof, it can take the shingles and just rip them all the way off a lot easier.
Great. How can a building owner ensure that if there has been damage done to their roof, they get the most insurance money possible?
Well, that's what a lot of roofing companies will help with. What we do is we go ahead of time. We're talking to the owner. The owner contacts us before they've talked to insurance, or even after they've made their first contact with insurance. And what we'll do is we walk around the house and we know what we're looking for as far as damage. So we're looking at the gutters, we're looking at the siding, we're looking at window screens, and anything else that we can find. I mean, even little plastic statues in the yard, anything on the property that would be covered by insurance. And so when the insurance adjuster gets there, you walk with the adjuster and you just very politely let them know where you've seen hail damage.
You mentioned to me recently there was a photovoltaic, old-fashioned style, I guess it wasn't photovoltaic, it was a solar panel that was damaged, and you've been helping a homeowner figure out the value of that piece of equipment. It was kind of a tricky thing to estimate, right? Can you tell them a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this was a solar panel that was only used in their HVAC system. And we were talking to the adjuster, and the adjuster had no idea what to value
solar
that.
panel was basically this thing that fed hot air somehow. I'm not familiar with this technology, but it fed hot air into their HVAC system, and it was mounted on their roof.
Yeah, there was 2 panels mounted on the roof. There was a line going in and then there was a return line. It was all ducting, like 8-inch ducting that went up into it and then came back out. It fed the.
It was probably a 20-year-old system, right? At
Yes,
least.
it was very old, and I have no idea what to value that, and the adjuster did not also, but I was able to help the adjuster on that to do some of the legwork on it, and it's very nice for your roofer to be able to help the adjuster wherever they can. And I was able to contact a solar company and figure out the replacement cost on that. So we were able to get the homeowner the maximum amount of money back on their insurance policy for the solar panels.
Great. So what are the things that an owner should be cognizant of when selecting a roofer?
First, make sure that they're local, because if somebody is not local, they are less likely to come back and fix something if there's something wrong. That's a bad part of the roofing industry. People come in and they fix roofs and then they leave and never come back even if there's a problem. Second, make sure that they know what they're talking about. There's a lot of salesmen out there that'll go and they sell a roof, but then they have no idea really how it's installed, and they're not there for the install. And they're not there afterwards, and they're not there picking up the nails and make sure that your property was properly taken care of while the roof was going on. I always try to stay on site when the roof is going on, and I help the roofing crew wherever I'm needed, and when they're not using me for anything, I'm out there picking up nails and making sure that they're not marking up your driveway or your siding or your window screens are getting bent out of shape, and making sure that all of your other parts of your property are being taken care of.
Great. What things should we look at in a roofer's proposal once we get it to, typically I like to get a few different proposals. Is that what you've typically seen, is people would talk to a couple of roofers, and once they get those proposals, how do they compare them to make sure they're apples to apples comparisons?
Well, yeah, it's normal for them to go get 2 or 3 different estimates. And what you should do is ask some questions on what type of shingles they're using and why, and what they're doing to set themselves apart from the other companies. Where we are usually not the cheapest bid out there, but we do a few other things that set us apart from the other companies, because that's when you get into some of the stuff like, this is your 15-pound felt here. This rips pretty easily.
So now is giving me a sample of 15-pound felt, and it feels like really heavy, construction paper is really all it is.
Yes,
And,
but
yeah,
go ahead and rip it.
and it does rip. It rips extremely easy.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is pretty average for roofing companies to use the 15-pound felt, because that's what insurance pays out, and that's the very basic minimum. Now this is what we use, is a synthetic felt,
Yeah.
and this is the minimum that we use.
And now this doesn't feel like a paper anymore. It feels more like a plastic of some sort, and I'm trying to rip it, and I can't rip it with my bare hands.
Yeah,
It's
nobody
extremely
can-
difficult.
Nobody can rip that. I have a hard time cutting it sometimes if my razor blade is dull.
And it looks like it's made out of strands going each way and then pressed together with kind of a plastic material. Very, very durable material. Looks like it lasts a long time.
Yep. And then of course, like I've already said previous, that we use a starter that goes up the ridge, or not the ridge, it goes up the rake. And a lot of companies don't use that. We also, if it's even on a high slope, if it's, well, what we call a high slope, if it's one of the lower slopes at the eaves, we use a product called ice and water. We also use this in the valleys, and this is just an added protection. Also, you use it wherever there's chimneys or step flashing. You can put it under that, and it's just an added protection. And this is what you would use in place of the felt.
So this has a really kind of plasticky appearance on one side. Is that the cover?
That's
Yeah, okay.
that's the back of it, and it's
As it comes off, it's
self-adhesive.
self-adhering. Okay, and it's got a sticky substance. It's kind of blackish that sticks kind of like tape on one side, and on the other side, It feels a little bit like the felt material, right?
Right.
And I'm trying to rip it. It does actually rip pretty easily, this material, right?
But it's
Yeah.
thicker.
But it is thicker, yeah.
Yeah, and this is just an added security.
So what's the difference between the ice and water shield material and, I'm blanking on this, but your replacement for the felt? What is this called again, the
Yeah,
felt?
yeah, this is synthetic felt.
Synthetic felt, yeah. What's the difference in
Well,
these two products?
the synthetic felt is not self-adhering. Well,
Okay.
where the ice and water is, and the ice and water, it actually has a little bit of thickness to it, where your synthetic felt is not near as thick. It's just strong,
Yeah,
and your ice and water actually has some thickness to it. So you always want to use the ice and water along with something else.
and how far is it 4 foot off of a valley that you typically install that, or how wide is that?
It kind of depends on the valley, but it could be somewhere around 30 inches or so on either side of the valley.
Great. Tell me a little bit about estimating technology and software. I know that some roofers use different services online that can help them determine how many squares are in a roof. Tell me about those services and how you use them and how accurate they can be.
Well, if it's just a normal small ranch house, we're just gonna get up there with a tape measure. But as far as some of your bigger houses or that has a lot of different slopes to it, we're gonna use the same company that the insurance agencies use, which is called Eagle View. And what they do is they use satellites to look at the house from a bunch of different angles, and they will be able to tell you how many squares, many hips and ridges and eaves to rakes. They can tell you all the different angles of the roof and how many square feet it is, and almost all aspects of what you need to know about that roof. It doesn't say penetrations, if you have some venting or satellite dish or anything like that on there.
Great. Now, you were mentioning to me earlier that most of the time roofers will subcontract out the labor, and that there is usually, it's almost always in our area anyway, people from Mexico doing the work. Talk to me a little bit about that process and how you interact with them, and any interesting things that people need to be aware of there.
Well, for us, our crew that we have, they are mostly from Mexico. I know that the ones that I know, they are here legally. I do not know everybody on the crew, but because I do speak Spanish, I am able to have a more personal relationship with them. But they do work very hard. Here in Kansas, we have the extreme cold and extreme hot, and where they come from in Mexico, they're used to working in that hot weather, and they're also used to the construction industry. Of course, when they get here, it's usually very different than Mexico, but they'll learn from the other guys that are already here.
So how many crews do you typically work with at a time? Is it just one, or
right now we just have one. There's another crew coming on board that we will be working with, but we use our one crew right now, and we don't like to have too many crews because we want to know our crew. I mean, they're our crew, even though they are subcontracted out. They're the ones that we know, and we know how they work, and they know what is expected from us.
So do they typically travel to the U.S. during roofing season and go back with their families during winter, or how's that work?
Well, this crew that we work with, they are here all the time. And in the wintertime, they just switch over to a different industry. They'll be doing inside remodeling and tile work, some concrete work.
Great. Tell me, what are some of the common issues that we should be looking out for with asphalt shingle installations? What do you often get callbacks on, and where are the tricky areas and places where they fail the most?
Any place that the asphalt shingle butts up against somewhere where there's step flashing or any other kind of flashing, or there's penetrations like venting, or there's a satellite dish, or chimneys, um, up against walls where there's step flashing. That's any place where the shingle is cut and there's some kind of transition. That's where you're going to probably have your issues.
So are there certain types of flashing that we should really be avoiding that don't work all that well, or sealants? You prefer, I would assume, flashing over sealants, or it depends on the application?
Well, we use a combination of both, but where some companies might rely more heavily on silicone to cover up any places that might leak. We really want to use our ice and water shield in combination with flashing. You're going to use your step flashing wherever you're going down the slope. If the slope runs into a chimney, then you're gonna have a solid flashing. You're not going to use your step flashing, and it really needs to be installed correctly in use with your ice and water shield. And then for at the end of it, if there is any little places that are leaving yourself open, you're just going to use a little bit of silicone there just to make sure as a secondary precaution.
Is a chimney probably the biggest place in which there's leakage issues because of the irregular surfaces of masonry, or is there probably a higher area that fails more often?
Well, we've been called back a lot for chimneys, but that's because it's very easy to improperly install, either because they don't know how to install around a chimney, or they're just trying to save time and money, because they install that the shingles right there around the chimney with the flashing and everything. If they don't want to spend the extra added time on there, they'll probably get away with it for a few years. And when it does fail, their manufacturer warranty or their workmanship warranty is already up, so they don't have to worry about it, because it takes a little bit of added patience and time to install around a chimney better, because what they do is they'll use the step flashing as if they're going up against a wall, put it up against a chimney, and if they silicone the top of that, then there's no problem, I mean, for a couple of years. But really what they should do is they should cut a line in that chimney and install flashing that goes from the top down over the step flashing. That's the proper way to install it.
Great. Is it unreasonable for a building owner or property owner to think that their property would be in the same condition? For instance, should they be finding nails or asphalt shingles on the ground years afterwards, or is that too difficult to keep the site completely clean and to protect the site and keep it in the same condition as prior to the install?
It is very difficult to keep all the nails off the ground as far as when you're leaving the job. We tell them that there's a very good chance that they're going to find a few nails at the end of our job, but we work very hard at cleaning up the property so that it looks like we had never even been there. We don't want to squish their plants. We don't want to have any scuff marks on the walls. When shingles fall, when they have fresh asphalt that has just been ripped open on the side of a shingle, sometimes when they fall, they will scuff the siding. So we'll put up barriers for that. If the eaves overhang enough, there's a good chance they will not hit it. We'll use tarps to protect anything that's on the ground and going up the walls. But if the eaves are not big enough, then we'll put up plywood up against the walls to protect the walls. As far as the nails, multiple times during the job, when I'm there and the crew's not using me for something, I'll get down on the ground and just start picking up nails, just to have, so that the nails will be picked up ahead of time, so you don't have to pick up those same nails later on, because there's going to be other things that we need to be doing to protect the property. But at the end of every job, we're always using a magnet, going around the house multiple times, because we don't want anybody to even know that we really even been there. The only thing we want them to see is the brand new roof on the house.
Great. That's, I think, a great place to stop. Thanks a lot for joining us this week, Niles. Your information has been very informative.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you next time with Building Talk. Thanks a lot. I'm Bryan Falk. Welcome back to another edition of Building Talk. I'm Bryan Falk. We have Nile Wilke again with Beach Exteriors. Nile is a roofing specialist, and he's going to talk to us this week a little bit about roof venting and ice dams. And Nile, why don't you tell us a little bit again about yourself and your specialization?
Well, I grew up around construction, and long story short, I decided to go ahead and specialize in roofing. It's something I understand well, so it was a good fit for me.
Great. What are the different types of roof vents you've used in the past?
We have done 3 different types. The one that I try to steer away from that some customers want are turbines. And those turbines, they're mechanical. They sit on top and then they spin and along with the wind, and they help get the air out that way. I prefer not to use anything mechanical because it has a tendency to fail. We will typically try to steer the customer either towards box vents, which is just a box that sits on top of the roof that's has the shingles going on top of a kind of a flange going around the outside, and it allows the roof to ventilate that way. Or there's a ridge vent where the decking is actually cut at the very top of the ridge where the 2 slopes meet at the top, and there's some plastic in there that has some mesh in there so that nothing big like bugs or snow or anything like that can get in there, but it allows the air to go out, the hot air to go out.
Okay, so there's the ridge vents, there's the box vents, there's the mechanical vents, and then there's the ones that are moved by the wind, right? Those are the 4 main types.
Yeah, there's also there's one that's called a power vent. We tell customers that we're not going to install those because they tend to fail.
Have you used ridge vents before?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have used ridge vents.
Ridge vents, and then there's the E vent as well, right?
The gable. There's the E vents too, but I have not installed those, but I have heard about those. I know that a lot of siding guys will put them up in the eaves, but there is another one that's with the shingles that I have not installed. My partner has installed them, but I have not.
Another one that's with the shingles. What do you mean?
Yes,
by that?
it's at the base of the roof, but I don't know a whole lot about that.
So it actually goes directly underneath the shingles, or how's that work?
I really don't know how it works because it's not very popular.
So there's all kinds of ways, I guess, you can vent a roof. Is there any? You mentioned you don't like the mechanical venting systems because they can fail, and maybe a homeowner or a building owner wouldn't be aware of that failure until it's too late. What are the advantages and disadvantages of the other systems in your mind? And when would you use one system over another?
Well, mechanical, yeah, they fail. They end up squeaking, or they just stop and they allow water to get in. The 2 that we use are the box vents and the ridge vent, and to me they both work pretty well. The ridge vent, the advantage of the ridge vent is between the boards, the rafters holding up your roof. That's where the heat builds up, and it goes up the roof with the slope. With your ridge vent, it allows that heat to escape between every one of those. During the whole ridge of your roof, the heat is able to escape properly. When you're dealing with box vents, you're only able to escape that heat wherever the vent is at, which a lot of people will just put them on one side of the house, and there could be a lot of space between those vents, which doesn't allow for the proper amount of ventilation.
Oh, great. So why does a roof even need to be vented?
Well, the heat can build up inside of a house mostly during the summertime, and that heat, if you do not have any ventilation, the heat's going to start pushing back down inside of your house, which is going to make your house very uncomfortable, and your air conditioner is going to be running way too much. And also, along with your shingles, if your attic is really hot, it's going to decrease the life of your shingles. And what happens is the tar inside of the shingles will start to heat up, and it will emit a gas, and that gas has nowhere to escape, so it starts popping the granules just so that air can escape from the tar heating up. And so you start losing your granules, which starts degrading your roof even faster.
You have any idea how hot is too hot in an attic in the summer?
I do not remember the temperature that is, but it gets very hot here in Kansas, because we can have some times where it's well over 100 degrees, and it's unbearable in that attic if there's not adequate ventilation.
Yeah. And we talked about before the interview how also it's important sometimes in the winter to make sure there's no moisture up in the attic. It's kind of like the window effect. In the winter, when you look out, if there's not a double glazed glass or a storm window, you sometimes can get some moisture on the inside of the glass and condensation. Well, the same effect was happening in my attic at my home. Still is. I need to get it resolved. And I think the answer is increasing the amount of ventilation in the attic. Anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, it kind of makes sense if you have a really, in Kansas, it does get very cold on the outside. So if you have your shingles that are getting really cold, and that cold temperature is going into your attic, where you're heating your house and you're getting a lot of temperature transfer into the attic. Yeah, you have your hot mixed in with your cold and high humidity. It can, that will cause condensation.
How often do you get building owners coming to you and saying that they need to increase the amount of ventilation in your attic? Or is that typically just something you do as part of a roof install?
That is something that usually the roofers are talking to the customers, because when we get up there, we can see the effects of an attic that is not ventilated properly, where most people are not thinking about that. If the customers usually talk about it, it's because they're just trying to keep their energy bills down, where they think they're paying too much to heat their house or to cool their house throughout the year.
Great. Do you ever see any issues with wind-blown rain or snow getting pushed into an attic through ventilation?
Yep. There's not as much through ventilation. If you have the mechanical type that has quit working, when it stops spinning or doing whatever movement it's supposed to do, that the water is allowed to come in. Usually with the ventilation, it has to do with that it was installed improperly, and on a lower sloped roof with a wind-driven rain, which the wind is pushing the rain in the opposite direction. Usually the rain's going to go down with the slope, but if the wind is pushing hard enough, it will actually go up the slope. It will start finding places to penetrate that roof that are not normal. They'll bypass some of the flashing and get to places where it was not meant to be.
Great. How typical is it to see insulation blocking eave vents? Do you see that very often? And do you correct it, or what's your typical approach on there?
Well, as a roofer, we don't usually end up correcting that. I have done some attic work that I've corrected that, but it's a lot easier to deal with if you're installing, at the install, compared to trying to go back and fix the problem.
Have you used a cardboard baffle system to allow that to vent, or you just push the insulation away from it, or what's your typical approach?
Well, we use the cardboard baffles. That's what I have done in the past. Basically, you're putting cardboard up there, so when you're doing the install, or if you're trying to retrofit, you you put it up there so that there's a gap between the rafters.
Great. Well, let's move on to ice dams. First, tell us what is an ice dam and why do they occur?
Well, this is before I really got into the roofing all the way. I have a house that there is a low slope on the roof. Low slope is like a 312 roof. That means for every 12 inches that you move horizontally, the roof pitch goes up 3 inches. And I still own this house, and I haven't seen too much more of a problem with it. But they put a regular asphalt shingle on the low slope part of the roof, and what that does, if they don't have ice and water below that, and they didn't do it correctly, the ice or the snow piles up on the edge of the roof, and when it starts to melt, the ice does not allow the water to go off the roof properly, and it starts going up the roof, and it starts finding places to go inside of the house.
So what's happening is there's an overhang on the roof where the overhang is colder than above the attic portion of the roof because the attic is emitting heat and melting above, and so the overhang is basically because it's cold, is damming up any water flow and icing up and creating issues in the roof, right?
Correct.
Yeah, great. So tell me, how do you prevent that? Your the ice and water shield that you install needs to be high enough so that it's above the edge of the overhang. How far up from the overhang do you go?
Well, up from the overhang, you're wanting to go at least a couple feet. But if the roof is low enough sloped, you shouldn't have asphalt shingles. You should have a rolled roofing on there. And that rolled roofing, it's going to have a base sheet that is self-adhering, and then it's going to have another cap sheet on top of that that is wide enough that it's not going to allow that to happen.
So asphalt shingle can be applied, 312 and above in slope, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and a rolled roofing, tell me what type of product that is. Are you talking like is it similar to an asphalt shingle, or is this more of a single ply membrane, or what is this?
They have some that are like an asphalt shingle, but we use what's called a modified bitumen. It's tougher. It doesn't break as easily. It's an all-around product that works awesome for low slope roofing. Of course, you don't want to do flat. It has to have some kind of pitch to it.
Okay, so modified bitumen. I didn't realize that's what you're referring to. So it's a cold applied modified bitumen that you typically use?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, and tell me a little bit about how that's installed. I've used both hot applied modified bitumen in the past, and that's a messy process. And then cold applied, you've probably only used cold applied because you do more residential applications.
That's correct.
Right. Tell me about how you do that and what the process is.
Well, you're gonna have your normal your OSB, your solid decking, and then on top of that, you're gonna use your felt, like what I've said in the past. We use our synthetic. Then, I apologize. You have the base sheet. That is your felt. I'm sorry. You have your base sheet, which goes on top of the decking, and that has a glue that is on there that you pull off of plastic after you put it down, and it will self-adhere to your OSB, and it's a really good stuff that helps prevent any kind of leakage. And then on top of that, you have it's almost the same product, but it has the granules on top of that, which are colored to match whatever asphalt shingle you have on top of the rest of the roof if it flows into a higher slope.
And that's a product that gives you about a 30-year roof, probably?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and then we mentioned in the last episode that some of these other asphalt shingle roofs, they're labeled as 50-year or 30-year, and in ideal conditions, they might actually give you 30 or 50 years, in your opinion?
Yes, and it really depends on the environment, because we've had people that had 50-year roofs put on, and then 7 months later, we're having to redo it. But that's not normal. That had to do with a hailstorm that was baseball size hail that's moving 80 miles an hour. So,
Great. Tell me a little bit more about ice dams. What happens when an ice dam occurs, and have you seen any instances and stories that you can talk about the damages that can occur?
well, when the ice dam occurs, like we said earlier, the water backs up. It's being heated from the house, and the eaves, it's still cold, so the water starts moving up the slope, and it finds a gap in your shingles. After it finds that gap, it's still going to try to run down. But if there is any kind of penetration in the felt, then it's going to go through the felt at that hole, and then it'll start working its way through the decking. And over time, that decking is going to deteriorate and allow for that water to go through the decking. And depending on where that ice dam happens on your slope, a lot of times it's at the eaves, so you know that it's right there. If you get inside the attic, you can see where it's coming through the decking. But if it happens anywhere close to the ridge of the house, it can be extremely difficult to find out where that leak is coming from, because it might work its way down under the felt, across the decking, and show up anywhere. It could be 20, 40 feet from wherever that leak happens, that the leak penetrates the asphalt shingle. It could, when it goes downhill, it could show up all different kinds of places by the time it enters the house.
Great. And I assume all the roofing installations you perform, you try to solve these as part of the design. So, for instance, if you're installing a new roof, you make sure there's adequate ventilation, and also you put ice and water shield at the overhangs to prevent some of this from happening, and possibly make recommendations on modifying their insulation in their attic. Right?
Yes.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for joining us. You've really enlightened us on roof venting and ice dams, and now appreciate it. Thanks for your knowledge today.
Yes, thank you.
All right. We'll see you next week on Building Talk. I'm Bryan Falk. Thanks a lot. Bye.